What's up, guys? It's been a while since I recorded like a Road to 2000 or Road to 2100 video. So I'm gonna throw one of these in there along the speedrun videos. So I got this game with the white pieces. This is a rapid 15-10 game, rated 2000 and change, and my opponent Varden 60, 2024. I open up with 1e4. Let's see what black plays. Black plays a Sicilian c5. So there's a ton of different things you can do as white. I go knight c3, trying to steer the game into a Grand Prix attack setup. Whoa. But black goes knight c6, developing a knight towards the center. Makes perfect sense. Normal move in the Sicilian. Again, white has a ton of moves here. The one I choose is bishop b5. This immediately attacks the knight and gets my bishop outside of my pawn chain because I want to close my pawn chain and I don't want my bishop locked inside, so I throw it outside the chain with an attacking move. That's basically the idea behind it. Okay, so he moves his knight out of harm's way and attacks my bishop in return. As white here, you have a lot of options. You can retreat your bishop so it doesn't get captured. You can develop, you can close the pawn chain. I mean, there's a ton of moves. The move I play is a developing move. So I decide to develop knight f3. It prepares castling. It attacks the knight in the center, which moved twice. And it doesn't waste time moving the bishop to try to save it. That's my idea. So he takes the bishop, saying, okay, I got the bishop pair. But that moves the knight a third time. I have to recapture, forced move, so there's nothing to talk about. He goes a6. It's a reasonable move. It says it's still a book move. You hit the knight has to retreat, and then you can expand with b5 and fianchetto your bishop. So it's very logical from black. Now as white, this square doesn't make any sense, so I chose knight c3, just bringing it right back to the center, and I have two pieces developed. I'm ready to castle. Black has nothing developed, not ready to castle, and he's missing this knight because he spent so many moves. Black goes e6, and this can prepare a potential d5, right, to break open the center. It also opens up his bishop's diagonal. It's a developing move. It's a helpful move. It makes a lot of sense. So as white here, I'm thinking, what to do. We can castle. That looks logical. You can try to close the pawn chain and play some type of closed Sicilian. That looks logical. But I chose to play d4. I figure I'm better developed, right? This move opens up my bishop for more development. It takes space in the center. It's a strong, principled move. And if he takes, which is what they say is his best response and what I expected, because he gave up this knight over here, I took with the queen because I'm not afraid of the knight tempo. So I thought that now, if all this transpires, I have two knights out and a queen, and I'm ready to castle. He has nothing developed, not ready to castle. It's crazy to me that the engine says it's 0.3. Like, that Sicilians hold up so well because to my eyes, this just looks better for white. Like, clearly better for white. But, I don't know. So, he plays knight e7 because if he develops the knight to f6, he's probably worried about getting hit with e5, and then he doesn't have anywhere good to go. If he goes here, he gets hit again. If he jumps in the center, he loses a pawn. So he goes to e7, trying to develop the knight without it getting hit by a pawn. Maybe he has other ideas, but I'm not sure what they are. I don't play the Sicilian. I'm not sure of Sicilian ideas. So, in any case, I say let me continue developing. You know, my bishop has, if you go here, you're going to get hit with f6. D2 is unnecessarily passive. E3 makes sense, but f4 controls a whole nother set of squares. So it makes even more sense. Also, I feel like b5, bishop here. Maybe stopping the rook coming here is nice. I don't know. Maybe stopping the queen coming here is nice. I know in a lot of Sicilians the queen goes to c7, so he just develops the knight. So he just uses this circuit and now hits my queen. But because it took so much time, and now his king's knight is actually on the queen side, and the king's knight I feel like is important to defend your king. So he hits my queen. I have to move my queen, but I want to keep it active. I go to d3, just staying in the center. I'm ready to castle either way. And if the knight ever hits my queen, I just drop back to d2 and I'll kick the knight with a3. No big deal. So black goes east, bishop e7. He says, okay, let me develop and prepare castling. e7 keeps it closer to the king, a little safer. Okay, so it makes some sense. He's developing. Now, I choose to castle. And now in this position, I'm thinking, okay, I can castle long, which is perfectly fine. But because he has the b8, like he wants to play b5 anyway, and once he does, I mean, b4 comes, and I'm sure my king is fine in the complications, but maybe I get started first. I don't know. But because he already had a6 in, I'm like, you know what? He's like one tempo up, and I might as well castle kingside, put my rooks in the center, and I'm fine. And I'm fully developed, and I'm fine. H5, I mean H4 is a consideration, but I would only really consider it more seriously A, after he castled, or B, if he had played G6 first. So I have a hook. So even though the engine likes it, I like castling. Makes more sense to me without a hook and without already castled. So now he castles. And also I was thinking, if I ever did want to play H4 later, I'll probably be able to. But right now I'm trying to play with the pieces, obviously. I'm not setting up pawn storms, so I develop my rook to the center of the board and try to triple control this square, because if I can prevent him from playing d5, I'm thinking, by going here, then positionally that's a bind that's going to be really good for me. And currently, if he pushes d5, I get a pawn, he gets a pawn, but then I win a pawn in whichever way. So he can't kind of push d5, and by triple stacking, he can't push d6 to remove the weakness because it still hangs. So this is a very nice move. Black now goes b5. Makes a lot of sense. He's not going to develop it this way, so he goes the other way. And here you have options as white. You can obviously finish your development with the rook. That makes sense. What else? Yeah, I mean, finishing development makes sense. Bishop d6 is what I was talking about earlier. We saw something similar in one of my other games where it creates this bind because the d-pawn can't move. So bishop d6 is positionally a good move. Rook here is a nice developing move I was looking at. But I said, you know what? If I can get e5, it opens up my queen. He doesn't have a king's knight, which e5 would normally kick. He doesn't really have king's defense, and I have a lot of pieces here. I was thinking, okay, e5 does give up control of some light squares, but I didn't think that was a problem. I thought e5 was good, like a good attacking move to start with. So I played e5. It looked like he couldn't take advantage of it, and he goes queen a5. he tries to um, he tries to develop the queen and say, I'm going to play b4, and if you move your knight, I'm going to scoop your a2 pawn, which was protecting it. So queen a5, it's like a sneak attack, right? Because a lot of people won't see the b4 threat. It looks like he's just activating the queen and developing. So I spent a lot of time here, actually. And I was like, my initial instinct was like, oh, queen a5, and then I immediately just shifted my eyes to the king side and said, I saw b4 was a threat. I said I don't care about the a2 pawn. Like, who cares? I'm gonna let him take it with the queen. I really wanted to go in this position knight e4, and this is what I was trying to calculate. I'm like, I don't care about the pawn either way, so forget b4. I'm gonna jump my knight in, which looks at some nice squares. He's gonna take the pawn. This is what I'm trying to look at. I'm like, oh, these rook moves don't do anything. He just takes more pawns. So you just continue the attack. So let's say knight in, queen takes. Well, now I kind of have to jump a knight in and threaten checkmate. If he takes, I can take with the other knight, threaten checkmate. He'll probably have to go g6. But then I can jump my knight back into the center and hit the weak dark squares. But then I'm like, okay, this is good. But then what I didn't like is I go knight e4. I'm like, what else does he have, right? Then I looked at he has knight b4 response hitting my queen, and the queen would then have to go off of this diagonal, which is the checkmate diagonal. So I was like, knight here, knight here. I mean, the queen can go to safety, but I move it somewhere. I kind of have to pin the knight with like queen d2, because now everything starts to hang. And I was like, that's a little annoying. So let me play a3. It's funny that it says a3 is good, but if you like put the engine on and look at the lines, it says it's the best. So that makes no sense. But anyway, I figured, okay, his queen's not doing anything here, right? If I go here, the only reason I played a3 was to stop the idea knight b4. And I said, okay, I don't care about the pawn if he wins anything. I just want to stop this move so I could play knight e4 and knight g5, knight g5. And I had to see ahead of time that b4 here, if I just took the pawn, I would still have the same problem with the knight, so that wouldn't solve it. So before I made a3, I had to see that on b4, I ignore it, jump my knight in the center, and now the pawn takes away the square from the knight, so he can't jump in. And so in order to get his knight there, he would have to take my pawn, wasting a tempo, and then I would take back with my pawn, covering the square again. So now he has to waste another tempo winning that pawn so he can move his knight. And those two wasted tempi, I'm going to be creating checkmate threats. So I figured a3 is fine. He doesn't play b4, which is what I expected. He moves his rook over to, I guess, next play b4 and maybe develop the rook. I wasn't afraid of, when I saw this, I was happy because I want to checkmate the guy. So this move looked very slow and very, like you could play before anyway. You don't need the rook. I'm not sure what it did. It doesn't help, like it defends the bishop, but it's not like Amphi and Ketout. He doesn't need the support. So now I said, okay, now I'm definitely jumping my knight into the center. And yeah, I spent like 3 minutes or something on like a3 trying to figure out what my move was there. And a3 turns out to be a very good move in that position. Just stopping all black's ideas and then commencing my own. A little prophylaxis never hurt, right? Okay, so I jump my knight in the center. And now I'm just trying to calculate what happens if I put a knight on g5. What does that lead to? And which knight am I supposed to move? How frustrating. Okay, so he finally goes b4. But there's no knight, so it doesn't come with tempo. And again, if he wants to jump his knight here, he has to take and then spend another turn, right? So I have all the time in the world, it feels like. So now I ignore b4. I think this is way too slow. And I was calculating like crazy to figure out which knight to put here and how the lines work out. And what happens if He takes one knight, then I can replace it. But what happens if I put a knight here and he doesn't take? Then I have two knights, and I might be like jockeying for position, so I have to be careful which one I want to move. And it turns out that one is significantly better than the other by like 1.5 pawns almost. I did end up finding the right one, and I came to the conclusion that if I moved this knight, it would open up my queen to go to h3. And that was my deciding factor, because in all the lines I had, I know he's going to go g6, and I needed to get off this diagonal and keep the threats. So with a knight here and queen here, it creates the threat again. So I jumped my knight, the correct move. The other knight still is an advantage, but this is clearly better, like, or winning even. And the secret threat here is knight to f6 check. And this is another reason I picked this move, because I thought this was a sneaky check that he might miss. And what this does is, if I give him a check and he takes either way or moves his king, he has to do one of those three moves. The knight moves, it's a clearance sacrifice, and my queen comes in with checkmate. So it's a very sneaky threat. I thought maybe he won't see it. He sees it, he goes g6, stopping all my shenanigans. And this is what I calculated, either this or with the inclusion of bishop takes knight and replacing it. And then my follow-up move was queen h3, which re-threatens checkmate, which I thought was very important. I knew in my head that his only real move is h5. Okay, he can throw this in because it's a very similar position and then play h5, but h5 is even better by itself. So he takes the knight, I just replace it with my knight, threatening checkmate, and now he has to go h5, so same thing. And now you kind of have to, there's nothing, you can't sack anything here, right? So you have to find a way to continue the attack. And the first thing that popped into my mind was g4. I'm like, my king is safe even with g4. If he takes my pawn, that's checkmate. If he doesn't take my pawn and I take his pawn and he recaptures and I get my queen in, that looks devastating. So g4, he has to do something else. Not entirely sure what. I wasn't exactly sure, but I know that they have resources that I don't see all the time. Rook b5. I take this pawn. He takes the central pawn. I get a rook. He gets a bishop. Yeah, and it looks very just problematic. That's like to calculate a classical game. So instead, I decided to continue my attack with knight e4, getting control of the dark squares. And now that he put everything on light, I'm thinking he has all these dark square weaknesses. And I figured if I have the time, maybe I can like just walk my queen in or something. Put a knight here and just checkmate him. He doesn't have any dark square defense, I felt like. His queen's off sides. And this guy's not in the game. This guy's not in the game. I thought I could just checkmate him. But the one thing I had to calculate... Well, first of all, you have to make sure this pawn isn't like super hanging. And okay, so let's see what he does. He takes the pawn, which was not actually hanging. Black probably should have gone for like f5, trying to kick the knight. But then maybe queen g3. He can't take the knight, probably because check here, or maybe take here first. I don't know. But he probably should have tried f5. Usually that's like last resort option for black, and so many times when they're about to get mated is like f6 or f5. So he takes the pawn, but he walks into a pin, and now there's a ton of winning moves here, but I wasn't sure. I really wanted to do something like knight f6, which is the best move, but I didn't play it. The thing is, he can never take the knight, so even if he goes up one to attack your knight, he can never take it with the king because he'll get checkmated. He'll walk into uh, queen and bishop checkmates. So I saw that was an option. Also here, you can just take the pawn. I felt like, and if he takes your knight and you take with the queen, I thought that was still very scary because you have rook lifts. So I was considering this and sacking. I was considering this and moving my queen up and in somewhere. But then I'm like, let me just stick to simple tactics. And after like a minute or something, I went here, and what does this do? Well, A, it threatens the knight with the rook behind it. B, it lines up with the king. So now when I go check, and then I take this pawn, uh, it may be pinned if his king stays on the g-file, but the knight's in trouble. And I also had to realize, I said to myself, okay, if I go queen g3, it hits the knight twice. He can't really move the knight because I'll just take the rook. How does he defend the knight? So I said, okay, here he could only push the pawns. If he pushes this pawn, it hangs multiple ways. If he pushes the f6 pawn, what did I see? Wait, queen here. Oh yeah, if I go there, I take the knight and queen g6 because the g6 pawn's hanging now with check. So I said he can't actually protect it with the pawn, so queen g3 just looks winning. And I didn't notice he could actually protect it with the rook. That completely was off my radar. But then I found a really cool move here. I saw this move at rook b5, and I'm like, it gets out of the pin, and it protects the knight a second time. I mean, my goal wasn't really, like, I thought it was definitely winning. I was going to win the knight, right? But I also thought that even without the knight, I'm still going to checkmate him, so the knight doesn't actually matter. And then when I saw this move, I'm like, okay, it's interesting, but something looks fishy. And I'm like, this construction's weird. He needs the rook and the queen to both defend the knight. Can I attack anything? And so I played this really cool move, a4. And so I say, what if I just go a4? I hit the rook, right? It's tempo move. If the queen takes, it undefends the knight hangs, right? So the queen can't take. If the rook, it can't stay here. It can't move here because of the knight. Can't, and if it moves to d5, which, oh no, he didn't do. I thought he did it for some reason, but if you go here, you walk into the check fork. So I go here. He realizes he's going to lose material, whether it's the rook, the knight, he's losing something. So he just develops a piece and succumbs to his fate. So you can do a ton of things here. It's completely winning. I throw in this check because it's forcing, and the king moves. And then I take the rook. So I leave my knight hanging because he can't actually take it. And, I mean, you can obviously take this pawn with check. But I just decided to do like a more gangster move and take the rook and say I'll just take it next. He took the knight, which you definitely can't take. Like, your instinct here should be, this looks very dubious. I look like I'm walking into a mating net. And there is a mate in 8 here. But I said, you know what? This is an easy win because after I took the rook, it blocks the queen's protection. So even if there's no mate, I just take a free piece with check. And I did that because I thought he would resign because I just took another piece with check, but he didn't. And now he just moves here, and I'm like, maybe there's a mate with queen in here, but maybe there's f6. I don't want to calculate anything. I'm just going bishop d6. Another forcing move with check. He has to move the king. Snatch the rook. Maybe he'll resign. Doesn't resign. Queen a1? Maybe he was checking if I was using an engine because I was playing very well and very accurately this game. And maybe he assumed that if he went here and I took the queen, I'm human, but if he went here and I gave checkmate in 1 or 2 because he blocks the bishop, that I was cheating. I don't know. He went here and I just immediately took it. I didn't even look for anything. and he resigned here. I don't know why he just sacked those pieces, but crazy game. We got a couple points, high accuracy, but this stuff is very, very nerve-wracking because in positions like this, you know you have a good position, but it's not always clear how to continue the attack without losing your entire queen side or throwing the game. Um, so it's good practice. So whatever, you got to do it. You got to play these games and lose them to learn. So whatever. Uh, okay, submit your rapid games. No cheating, please. Hopefully this helps. Goodbye.